So, I, like so many other people on the internet right now, am currently obsessed with Baldur's Gate 3. I've been playing it a lot. Not so much in the last few weeks because of school, but I've been playing a co-op playthrough with a friend of mine. It's my first playthrough, it's her third playthrough. We've been having a ton of fun with it, and we finally got to play again last night, which was very exciting. Stayed up way too late playing that, but I am just like so into Baldur's Gate right now. I think the characters are all so interesting. So I did a thing a few months ago where I was recommending books to Ace Attorney characters. That was what I was currently obsessed with at that point. I'm still playing Great Ace Attorney, so I'm hopeful that I can do another Ace Attorney version of this. But I recommended books to the Ace Attorney characters, and now I want to do the same thing for the Baldur's Gate 3 characters because I've just been playing so much of it and having so much fun. So these are the books that I think I would recommend to all of the companion characters. I didn't do any of the villains or anything like that. If you'd be interested in seeing that, let me know in the comments below, but this is just going to be all of the companion characters. Also, these are in no particular order. I just wrote them down as they came to mind, so that's it. Also, if you hear a weird noise behind me, one of my cat's toys is this like battery operated thing. It's got a wire with a butterfly on it, and it like spins and it's motion activated, and it sets off every time I turn on a light or turn off a light. So in the process of setting up for filming, I managed to set it off like a bunch of times, so it's currently running. It should stop in a few minutes, but if you hear a weird noise in the background, that's what that is. So anyway, let's just go ahead and get started, and the first character we're going to talk about is the internet's current favorite vampire, Asarian. I am a big fan of Asarian. I think he's a great character. He is also currently the character I'm romancing on this playthrough. This was not the plan. It just kind of happened that way. I was actually going to romance Gail, but ended up romancing Asarian for very silly story reasons, but that's neither here nor there. The book that I would recommend to Asarian, though, is The Goblin Emperor by Catherine Addison, and I have a very specific rationale for this. I think Asarian would find this book very challenging. He would like the kind of sassiness of the characters because there is a lot of that. There's a lot of very like snarky comments in here. I think he would like that. I think he would like all the political intrigue happening here because this is following a young half-goblin named Maya who is suddenly made the emperor of the elf empire. And so he's kind of dealing with lots of like court intrigue and kind of trying to get his bearings in a society that he's mostly been kind of outcast from. So there's a lot of like court intrigue and politics happening here, lots of snark. But I think you would also find it very challenging because Maya is a very kind person. And this is very much a book about somebody kind suddenly being put into a place of power in a place that is very, very dark, and trying to do whatever they can to make the world a better place. And I think that that contrasts so much with Asarian's experiences of powerful people, and I think that he would find it very challenging. He would kind of like resentfully read this, if that makes sense. Like he would be convinced that Maya is just completely out of his depth, and he would just not want to believe any of what's happening here. He would find this, I think, a very difficult read just because it would challenge his own experiences and kind of beliefs about power and how people can use power and how people are willing to use power. So I think it would be difficult for him, but I think it would also be a good read for him. I think it would be good for him to kind of experience that and kind of think about power in a slightly different way. So I think that he would like kind of resentfully like this book. That's my friend who, this is her favorite book of all time, and also it's my favorite book of all time. We were talking about this because I was like, let me run my selections by you just to see what you think. And she agreed with me. She's like, you would resentfully like this, and also we both have played paladin characters that have romanced Asarian, and we think this is exactly the kind of book that our paladins would try to like shove into his hands. So I feel like I'm pretty confident in this pick, but I think it's the most of my picks, it's the most in contrast with like the character themselves, but I think it would be good for him to read this. Next up is Gail, and I've chosen a nonfiction for him because he very much values learning, and I think he would be a nonfiction reader in reality. So I've chosen one that I think would make him absolutely insufferable. I've got What Everybody Is Saying by Joe Navarro. This is a book about body language and kind of understanding body language, and it's written by a former FBI interviewer, I believe. He was a counterintelligence special agent and supervisor specializing in nonverbal communications. So Joe Navarro used to work for the FBI doing like interrogations and things, and he is a specialist in nonverbal communication. So this book is really all about understanding nonverbal communication, understanding body language, how you like can figure out a baseline for somebody's behavior, and then from there use that information to discern whether they're being truthful or not. It's not quite like a human lie detector situation, but just kind of gives you a sense of like how people are feeling and when their behavior moves from like a baseline for that person. So it's a really interesting read. I personally really enjoyed this book, and I think Gail would enjoy it because he likes learning, he likes practical skills. Like obviously he's a wizard, he's learning magic, which is something that he practically uses, but it would make him absolutely insufferable because he would just constantly be telling people like, oh, you're doing this. He'd be like pointing out their body language to them, and it wouldn't be like out of malicious intent. He just would be absolutely insufferable after reading this, but I think he should read it because he would think it was interesting. Then for Shadowheart, I would want to recommend Mongrels by Stephen Graham Jones. I think that for this one and for Lae'zel, actually, you're going to guess kind of which route I've taken with those characters because of the selections that I have. But Mongrels is a kind of coming-of-age story about this boy who is from a family of werewolves. All of his family are werewolves, and he doesn't know yet if he is going to be a werewolf, because I think he's like half werewolf, so he doesn't know yet if he's going to transform, and he just wants so desperately to fit in with the family that's raised him, because he knows that if he doesn't transform, he has to like leave his pack forever, and it's about like that search for community and wanting to be a part of this like particular community, wanting to remain part of his family. And there's a very dark backstory for this young man, and I just find this a really interesting read, but I think that this one is one that Shadowheart would really connect with based on the route that I've kind of taken her character arc on. I think that she would connect with this character's desire for community and desire to kind of belong, but also with his kind of struggles with, what do I do if I don't? What if this is not the right path for me? So I think that this would be a very emotional read for Shadowheart, but I think she would get a lot out of it. Then for Carla, I chose Trail of Lightning by Rebecca Roanhorse, just because I think she would really like Maggie Hosky, and there's just like this very badass adventure kind of plot line in here. You have Maggie, who is a monster hunter, and she is hunting monsters. There's this specific kind of odd monster that she runs into during a kind of standard job. It turns out that the monster behind it all is not something she's ever encountered before, so she goes off on this journey to kind of figure out what it is, who's behind it, all that kind of thing, and picks up some new friends along the way. And I feel like Carla would really enjoy that aspect of this. I think she would really like how badass Maggie is, and I think she would connect with Maggie's feelings about her powers, because Maggie has some supernatural powers that she doesn't always necessarily like want to have, that sometimes feel like a burden to her. I think that Carla would kind of connect with that element, and I also think Carla would really connect with the element of Maggie's story that's kind of about being betrayed by a mentor figure. So I think that she would have a good time reading this, and she would also have like some rage right alongside Maggie in this book, and I think she would just have a great time with it. Then for Lae'zel, I want to recommend what I think is the strongest possible recommendation for Lae'zel. I cannot think of a book that would be better for her. However, I did recommend this book for a character in my previous video with the Ace Attorney characters. So I want to mention it anyway, because I want to recommend Her She Who Became the Sun by Shelley Parker Chan. I just think she would love how ruthless Jia is in this, and she would really like that Jia is just like determined. She's going to get this goal, nothing is going to stop her, she's going to have power, she's going to do all of these things, and she cannot be dissuaded. I think that Lae'zel would love that. She loves ruthless people, and I think she would also really appreciate General Ouyang and his storyline here, and the kind of lengths that he's willing to go to do the thing that he feels like he's on the path to do. But I also feel like I kind of want to recommend the sequel to her as well. Like, I think she should read the whole thing, because I think the continuation of Ouyang's storyline would resonate with Lae'zel in interesting ways if she, particularly the ending of Ouyang's storyline, if she is going down the route that I have her going on, which is, again, I think this is another one that you can kind of guess, but if you have Lae'zel break from Blacketh, I think that General Ouyang's storyline would probably resonate with her in some interesting ways, but I just think that she would love how ruthless these characters are. That being said, I was trying to come up with something else because I knew I had already recommended that in the previous version of this, and my friend made a recommendation that I think is also really good for Lae'zel. So she pointed out that Lae'zel would probably really like Murderbot, because Murderbot is also just like extremely efficient, and Murderbot is sometimes bothered by this inconvenient little thing called caring for the people around you, which I get the sense is what Lae'zel is dealing with when she's hanging out in camp with everybody. She's always kind of annoyed that, like, damn it, these are... I kind of care about them, but also I hate them. I just think she'd really appreciate how efficient and calmly calculated Murderbot is. So I think she'd have fun with this series, but I think specifically, and again, if she's working with Vlaakith, I think she would really get something out of this particular arc of network effect and system collapse. Forgot the title for a second there, because there's a really interesting arc in here about, like, breaking from what you've always thought you were meant to do and having to then have the mortifying experience of being known, and also having to figure out, what do I do next? Like, I've lost the purpose that I originally had. What am I going to do now? Who am I without that purpose? And so I think that this particular arc for Murderbot would especially resonate with Lae'zel. So I really think that this was a good suggestion from my friend. So shout out to her for this one, because it was a great suggestion. And yeah, I just think that Murderbot is great and everybody should read it. So that's another reason for Lae'zel to read Murderbot, because it's just great. Next up on my list we have Will, and for Will I'm going to recommend Lord of the Rings. This is another one that my friend suggested. I had originally put down something else for Will, and I'm now forgetting what it was. But it was, again, another one I'd already recommended, so I wanted to do some different recommendations. And she pointed out that Will is very much like a kind of fantasy archetype hero character, and specifically we came to the conclusion that he's Aragorn coded, is what he is. Specifically, I believe she said it was Aragorn as Thorongil, I believe is the name. I haven't actually read the Silmarillion yet, so there's some pieces of that lore I don't totally know about, but he's Aragorn coded, and I think that he would have a great time reading this, and I think he would appreciate the conversations in this about, like, the weight that protecting the world puts on these characters' shoulders and the kind of damage it does to them, and the way that they have to kind of live with the fallout of these events. So I think that he would really enjoy this series, but I also feel like it would, he would feel seen in some ways, and that he would get a lot out of reading this and kind of connect with a lot of the characters in here and their experiences, particularly of things that resemble, like, post-traumatic stress disorder and things like that. I think Will would really connect with a lot of those experiences. For Jahira, I want to recommend The Scourge Between Stars by Ness Brown. This is a sci-fi horror, but I think that she would really like the main character in here, Captain Albright, who is having to kind of step up. Her father is actually the captain. She's the acting captain, that's the phrase. And she's having to step up in this kind of difficult situation where there's, like, lots of politics going on the ship. There's different factions that have kind of formed on the ship that are kind of rebelling against her leadership, and her father has kind of abandoned everyone. She can't get him to come out of his room, and she's just having to deal with all of that, and then all of a sudden, now there's aliens on the ship, and everything has gone to hell. And so I think that Jahira would enjoy Captain Albright and all of the work she puts in to protect the people on this ship. I think she would connect with that as herself, the leader of the Harpers. I think that she would just really resonate. This is the word for this video, apparently, is resonate. I think she would resonate with Jacqueline's story, and this kind of, I don't necessarily want to step up, but somebody has to, and I'm the one who can, kind of vibe to this story. I think that Jahira would really connect with that. And I just think it's a really great book, too. It's really fun sci-fi horror, and I want more people to read it. So that's another reason to recommend it to Jahira. For the last two, which are Halcyon and Minsk, I'm actually going to talk about these both at the same time because I want to recommend them the same book, but for different reasons. So for these two, I want to recommend Redwall by Brian Jakes. This is a, like, children's fantasy series that I loved growing up, and the first book in particular is a favorite. Although a lot of them were great, I also really like Tagarung and Rakti Tam and several of the other books in this series that the titles are now escaping my memory. But I really love the Redwall series, and I think Halcyon would really like this because it's a lot about nature. It's the main characters are all talking animals, so there's a lot of stuff about nature and about being in accord with nature. That's especially some of the later books, there's a lot about, like, the villains being people who are kind of, like, industrializing and things like that. So I think he would appreciate those aspects of it. And also just that it's a story about, like, being kind to others in a lot of ways, and about, like, good triumphing over evil. And also, I believe, my friend said that, I haven't gotten to the epilogue yet, but there's something about, like, Halcyon adopting children at some point, and he needs, like, stories for them. So perfect. It's great children's fantasy. I think these are wonderful and they're just so much fun. Now the reason I want to recommend these to Minsk is I'm not entirely convinced he can read, but if he can, I think he would love stories about talking animals. I mean, he runs around with Boo all the time. Like, I think he would love stories about talking animals and about the good guys smashing the bad guys and just, like, defeating them, protecting the forest. I think that Minsk would love that. He could listen to these on audio. That would be really fun for him. I think he'd have a great time with these. So I think that he should read Redwall. So those are all of my recommendations for the Baldur's Gate 3 characters. Let me know down in the comments below if you agree or disagree with any of my recommendations, and if you've read any of these and what you thought of them. I would love to know that as well. I really hope you've enjoyed this video, and if you have, I hope you consider giving it a like, maybe even subscribing to see what comes next. I'm currently posting on Tuesdays and Saturdays, and I hope to see you in the next video. Bye.